And a wonderful good day, and welcome to this session, which is about reducing help desk tickets by as much as 80% for your Nodes client management. I'm very happy that you've joined this session. My name is Florian Vogler. I'm the CEO of Panagenda, and I'll be running you through today's agenda and trying to stick with the 45-minute slot. So I'll be starting with an introduction and a quick refresher on what Marva Client is, which is a solution that can help you for free address a variety of Nodes client management topics. We'll then also quickly cover how you can get started in case you haven't installed Marva Client in your environment yet. And then we'll be covering 13 different business cases, 10 of which are entirely free across various Nodes client releases. And in the end, we'll finish up with a Q&A. So as a quick introduction and refresher on what Marva Client is, for those of you who may not know it yet, it's a Nodes client management solution for pretty much all Nodes clients out there, spanning Windows, Citrix, virtual desktop infrastructure, Macintosh, and HCL Nomad across the different flavors of mobile devices. It also runs on all types of clients, so whether that's basic clients or standard clients or IBM client application access or HCL client application access. And in essence, it started off historically as the client management solution for Nodes-rich clients. Now, over time, we added a number of modules in addition to our starter edition Marva Client Basic, where over time we added solutions for roaming, for real-time Nodes client management, real-time allowing customers to, for example, prevent actions on clients, such as creating databases on network drives, for example, or creating any local databases, or ensuring that when people travel, that they are always connected to best servers nearby. So, for example, when a user travels from Europe to Asia, that instead of connecting to servers back home, that he or she is then connected to servers nearby in that particular region. The Automate module was added to ensure that a Nodes client is always entirely synchronized with all server-side changes, so that when you create databases on a Domino server, all end users automatically get those databases on their desktops and bookmarks, for example. Similarly, when you delete a database on your Domino servers, it gets removed for your end users automatically. And when you change access rights, so you add people who get access to a database, then they get that database. And if you revoke access, then that database is removed on your end user clients. In essence, fully automating that whatever you do on your Domino servers is synchronized to your Nodes client. We then also have an Eclipse module for those customers that run the standard client, which is the vast majority, to also allow to manage any and all Eclipse settings. And lastly, a mail module that I will not go into further detail. Some time ago, we then added Marva Client Essentials into Nodes and Domino, beginning with release 10.01 for free together with HCL. And the goal of this was that customers can enjoy a rich variety of actions in their Nodes clients for free when they install Nodes or Domino 10.01. We'll go into further details a little bit later, but that is kind of a sub-version, so to say, of Marva Client Basic, so of the full feature scope, and which is given to all customers for free on rich clients with the beginning of 10.01. We also brought to market Marva Client Upgrade, which we've been doing for years, but then to be honest, like until 2 years ago, it was fairly hard to configure an upgrade because there was no configuration interface. And we added that to the configuration database to make it very easy for customers to upgrade to the latest and greatest from HCL. And then we also added Marva Client for free into HCL Nomad. Now that's a far larger scope than what Essentials is, on HCR Nomad because on HCR Nomad, you can essentially use all of Marvel Client Basic for free for all your HCR Nomad devices. So that means that you can manage desktop icons and bookmarks, which you don't see, but they are elemental for the client to function. You can manage location documents, connection documents, and pre-configure the client in the way that you need it. So that was just dear to my heart to kind of introduce to you the different flavors of Marvel Client that are out there. We will heavily focus in this session on Marvel Client Essentials for the 5 free business cases around that, and then also for free business cases around HCR Nomad. In the end, we'll be talking about the free business cases that are available for sale, so to say. Now, getting started is fairly easy in the sense of making sure that you have Marvel Client up and running in your environment, whether that's for Essentials or for Nomad or for the full versions of Marvel Client. In essence, Marvel Client consists of 2 server-side databases. One is for configuring what your clients are supposed to do, and one is for analyzing all your Nodes clients, and we'll be seeing more of that on the next slide. On the Nodes client, there is a single binary that is deployed into typically the Nodes data directory. There are exceptions, but that's kind of the broader rule. And that is activated via an extension manager add-ins entry in Nodes INI. As a reminder, it's already included in Nodes 10.01, so you don't have to deploy the binary into the data directory at all. But the moment that you install a 10.01 or 11 client, then Marvel Client is already there. So all it needs is then activation, which is very easy with a domino policy. In HCR Nomad, it's already included as well. So when you download HCR Nomad from the App Store or from the Play Store, then in essence, it's already there. Plus, it is already enabled in HCR Nomad. So you enjoy all the benefits on your Nomad devices straight from the start. Furthermore, there's only very little network traffic that Marvel Client introduces. So on average, we download 1 to 4 kilobytes when end users start their Nodes client. So whether that's launching your HCR Nomad client or launching your rich client, then there's very little download going on to just check the configuration database for any new changes. And there's a very small upload into the analyze, which is between 25 and 70 kilobytes to populate the data into the analyze database of what all your Nodes clients look like. And we'll be seeing more of that in just a second. Now, in case you were wondering of how do you get to those databases, then you can either navigate to this URL and you'll get the slides later on, or you just open the panagenda folder on any Domino server that is 10.01 or newer. So if you have a Domino server 10.01 or newer, just navigate to the panagenda directory on that Domino server, and you will find an install wizard that you can simply open, then click on a button, and it will automatically create the config and the analyze databases for you. So everything is there in place. You either download them if you're not on 10.01 yet, or you open it up on one of your already newer Domino servers. Now, once you've installed the databases, then I'll just give you a quick glimpse of what this looks like. In the configuration database, you have a navigation pane where the topmost view shows Rich Client Essentials, which is for your rich clients and covers the essential scope that we talked about earlier. And then all views below that are for licensed versions of Marvel Client, as well as for HCR Nomad. So that's where you can kind of then experience the full feature set of Marvel Client, and we'll be looking at a glimpse of what you can configure in just a second. On the Analyze database, there's a huge number of views that you can see here, hovering by, showing you your Nodes clients, what Nodes INI settings people have, what locations are they using, are they working with a local replica, what hardware do they have, what software do they have, and a zillion different data points more. I hope from the scrolling through you could see that there is quite some information in the Analyze database that fully allows you to understand what your Nodes client landscape out there looks like. So those 2 databases, one is for configuring your clients and one is for analyzing your clients and understanding what all is out there, is what that brings you. Now let's take a peek at what an action inside of the configuration database looks like or starts with. We won't be looking at the details except for in the free business cases, but I want to give particular attention to the so-called header section in every particular action inside of the configuration database. So first of all, on the top left, what you have is a what, when, who, and admin tabs. And in essence, the what tab differs from action to action. So depending on whether you're managing a location or a desktop icon, you have different settings to fill in. The when tab allows you to restrict actions to run on certain devices only, for example, only within a certain network segment, or only if people have sufficient disk space or similar things, and you can freely configure those conditions on your own. The who tab allows you to then associate an action to certain groups, people, or certifiers. So it's very easy to say that an action should run for everybody in your organization except for the board of management, for example. Now below that, you give an action a title. You can enable and disable actions seamlessly, and then you can decide when an action is supposed to run. So that is kind of in this section here, where there's quite some text here, showing all these different run types. But in essence, you can control whether an action is supposed to run before the login dialog or after the login dialog, or when the client is shutting down, or whilst the client is up and running on an hourly interval, for example. And depending on use case, we'll cover some of those in a bit. That comes in very handy to take full control over when you want what to be configured in your nodes clients. Below that, you have the option of how often an action runs. So whether it runs persistently, meaning every time people start nodes, or once only, or also subvariants like once a day only. The true magic is in persistent run types, meaning that you configure that a user should always have their mail file on the top left on the desktop, for example, or in recent applications on HCL Nomad every time they start nodes. And when you do that for a couple of things like managing locations and desktop icons, then that ensures that people stop calling helpdesk, because every time they start their nodes client, it will be properly configured according to your central configuration. One last thing here is on the right-hand side, you can see a so-called device and platform selector, where you can very easily say, I don't want this action to run on Citrix, or I don't want to have it run on a Mac, for example, or turn it around and say, I only want it to run on a Mac. So it's very, very easy to create actions that only apply to certain operating systems, releases, or hardware device types of nodes. Now let's take a broader look again at the topic of persistency and why that is magic and why it is fundamentally important for bringing down the number of help desk tickets in your organization. Typical help desk management is like, an end user calls nodes, and then when they've called the help desk, then somebody configures against that configuration and kind of fixes the problem. And then the next user calls and has the same problem. Again, somebody has to spend the same amount of time and energy to fix that problem for that particular user. We even have customers that decide that if it takes longer than 10 minutes to fix a client management problem on a nodes client, that they just re-image the entire machine because it's too effortsome. So in essence, what you have is you have repeating efforts for repeating problems all over again. Now with Marvel Client, what we do is we analyze the client landscape once, kind of, especially with the help of the analyzed database and with the help of help desk staff. We then ask what are the top 10 help desk issues that customers experience, and then we take a little more time to configure against what we found and what we discussed together with help desk staff. So the initial configuration may take a little bit longer because the aim here is to kind of fix the top 10 or 20 help desk issues that you have all over every time again, once and for all. And as a reminder, if we then make sure that those actions are always applied at every client startup, then that just fixes all your previous help desk incidents for good. There's another important note here is that Marvel Client allows you to perform the settings that you need. There are a number of things that you can control with Marvel Client that you cannot control with Domino policies. In all fairness, it's the same the other way around. There are some things that Domino policies can do that Marvel Client cannot do. As a very simple example, consider, for example, security key rollover that Domino policies are amazing at. In the simplest sense, you can say that Marvel Client is best to replace Domino desktop policies. For everything else, you should keep on relying on Domino policies. And one last thing, Marvel Client works offline and is lightning fast. So that means that if a user has a laptop and is at home and cannot connect to the network because, for example, the location document got messed up or something else is going wrong, then the user simply has to restart Notes, and all the actions that were already downloaded previously are enforced during that subsequent client start just as much. So this is essentially, apart from the what you configure, this is the true magic bullet, where if you ensure that all your issues that you have had in the past are fixed at every client startup in the future, then that brings down your client management issues by 80%. In combination with Marvel Client can configure things on your Notes client that are typically hard to accomplish with Domino policies only. So let's jump into use and business cases of what you can make from this and why it should be worthwhile to install the Marvel Client Config and Analyze database and try this out. Again, the majority that we will focus on here are free business cases that you can enjoy today with what's in the box of 10.01 and up, and we'll dive right in. So the first very simple use and business case is that there are Notes INI entries on your Notes clients that are so-called multi-value entries. In the simplest sense, for example, your clients may have entries like NSF_hooks that, for example, load antivirus scanners or other things, which, by the way, is not a good idea to have in any way, shape, or form because they slow down the client. So you may want to get rid of them. And you cannot do that with a Domino policy, whilst you can set NSF hooks equals with a Domino's policy to an absolute value. You cannot remove a sub-entry kind of in NSF hooks, as one example. And there are similar values like, for example, names or add-in menus or extension manager add-ins, as mentioned previously, where you may want to just remove a part of that Notes INI entry. And in Marvel Client in the configuration database, it's as easy as simply creating a Notes INI management action, telling it to unmerge a setting from a particular INI entry. In this particular example from NSF hooks, we unmerge NLNVP, and that's as easy as is. And yes, you can also merge entries. So if you wanted to add, for example, a PDF reader from Adobe into that entry, then you can do that and similar things. So merge and unmerge are two special options in Marvel Client that you can use to manage your Notes INI entries. Moving over to business case number 2, you may just in general want better control over Notes INI settings. So where it's either hard to understand what particular setting is what, where you would have to know which value you're looking for, plus you may want to actually tie it to a particular operating system or device type. In the simplest sense in the configuration database, you can simply say you want to change, for example, the time it takes until the logout dialog is automatically displayed in the Notes client so that the Notes display is locked for security reasons. And you may only want to apply that to laptops, independent or mobile devices, but not to desktops. And in that sense, it's very easy to just create that one particular action, check what you want to have changed and what you want to have it set to, and then just make the selection for the devices and the respective platforms. So again, that is something that is difficult to impossible to achieve with Domino policies and makes it very easy by using the configuration database. Business case number 3 would be the simple example of wanting to deploy files onto Notes clients. So for example, you may want to deploy an image to exchange the splash screen when people start Notes with your corporate logo as one example. Or you may want to run, well, first we have to deploy them. You may want to deploy custom scripts. Where this comes in fundamentally handy is once in a while there are security threats, for example, that can be investigated with scripts that you can download from the internet and then customized, but then the big question is, how do you bring those out onto your clients? And you may just want to bring them out using notes rather than going through a software deployment project, which typically is a lot more complex. So the first goal here is to essentially drop a certain number of files, which could be just the files that you depict here. For example, these files were used to identify a security threat, whether they existed across the organization, with a number of command line and PowerShell scripts to just deploy them onto the client. You can also deploy a zip file that Marvel Client then automatically unzips. So with a very simple action, you can simply instruct Marvel Client to put those files onto a certain directory of your Nodes client, Windows clients. And by the way, that works on Mac just as much, and it just doesn't work on HCL Nomad because it doesn't make sense to drop those files onto the operating system there. Now, once you've dropped those files, you may actually also want to run them. If you just drop the files to update the splash screen, for example, then you don't have to necessarily do anything. Maybe you want to change an INI entry. But in this particular case, you may actually want to also run the script that you just deployed. So you need to run a program. And that, again, is very easy in the Marvel Client configuration database, where you can simply choose to run any particular program path here with any particular parameter. You could use the previous example of running the command line batch script that we deployed earlier, or what this particular example shows you is running a simple command line and then launching the user's default browser with a particular internet page. This is specifically handy when, for example, you want to launch an intranet page to inform people of downtimes or of things happening or whatever when they start their client. Or as I mentioned earlier, you could tie that to the runtime of running on an hourly basis in the background so that you can communicate with your end users by just launching an intranet page from your corporate intranet and displaying that to end users. There are a zillion different use cases that you can also use this for, which I'm sure you can imagine based on issues you may have had in the past where you just couldn't instruct the Nodes client to launch a program. As a side note, many companies out there without Marvel Client choose to send buttons to end users and then hope that people will click on the buttons and similar things. And when the button doesn't work as expected for all end users, they send them buttons again. And in this case, you don't have to send any buttons anymore to your end users doing anything, but you simply tell Marvel Client to do things silently when users start Nodes or thereafter, or when they close Nodes. So again, a very handy action to simply execute things in end user context on your Nodes clients. User business case number 5 would be the necessity, for example, to deploy very large files to all your end users. So think of it this way, that you have an upgrade package, like in this particular example, you want to deploy the Nodes admin and designer package to all your Nodes users. And that package has close to 1 gigabyte in size. And you wouldn't just want to drop that during client startup where it then downloads 1 gigabyte from somewhere and blocks the client startup, but you want that to happen, number one, in the background without blocking people from working. And number two is you do not want to bloat your network. So just creating an action that would download 1 gigabyte on every client startup as fast as possible. If in most corporate networks, that would lead to people no longer being able to work because they all want to download that gigabyte right now. Now, the Smart File Downloader comes with various handy configuration options where you can say between certain time windows, like between midnight and 7 a.m. in the morning, they can download as fast as possible. And then between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. in the afternoon, you can throttle the download and you can say it should only download a certain number of subsets of that large file. So in essence, you make sure that all your end users can continue to work whilst downloading this file over time. Many of our customers use this together with corporate software deployment because corporate software deployment often works for like 90% of all their end users, but there are users for whom it does not work as reliably because they are in very remote locations, or with COVID / Corona, they also have the issue that at home things may not work as desired or may bloat the network of the end user at home. So it's very handy to either use with Marvel Client Upgrade or to use with your Marvel Client, with your corporate software deployment to have it downloaded, the file, and rely on that rather than having to do it on your own. So those were kind of the 5 business cases that you get to enjoy with Marvel Client Essentials. So they work across the board on all nodes-rich clients, so be it on Windows or Mac, and that you can simply use for free with Marvel Client Essentials. That again is included with Notes and Domino 1001 and up, or you can install into Notes 9 if you haven't upgraded yet. Now moving over onto HCL Nomad, there's a number of actions in the configuration database that are specifically targeting HCL Nomad. So the mobile Notes client that you can download from the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. So as one particular example, let's assume that you want to manage location or connection documents for your HCL Nomad clients. Whilst you cannot select a location inside of HCL Nomad because there is no location selector, it assumes that you should always work online. You may still want to tweak certain values in the location document that is used on HCL Nomad. And in the Marvel Client Configuration Database, it's as easy as simply specifying the location name. You can change existing locations but not add them if they are missing. You can add non-existent locations. You can also add or change depending on state of client. And then you can also manage locations on field level, which is very easy by later on allowing you to then here select that certain fields are only supposed to be set when they're empty, or if the location didn't exist yet, or you want to permanently enforce them on an ongoing basis. So for example, if the internet mail address of an end user changes, ensure that Marvel Client synchronizes it with the public Domino address book. So the simple solution to this particular business case is location and connection management actions. The next free business case on HCL Nomad would be setting the best location. Now you can add an additional location, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people will also use that location that you just added, or you delete locations and want to make sure that they switch over to a better one. So you had office locations in the past and you want to make sure that they in the future use the online location, then there's a simple action in the Marvel Client Configuration Database that allows you to, for example, set the default location for the so-called login dialog, or even override the selected location in the login dialog. If you don't have a login dialog because you use single sign-on or any of the users don't have to enter their passwords options, then you can simply typically use the override location after login. Even though they don't see a login dialog, it will just make sure that the client is then switched to the right location as you see fit. This is also especially important when using this in roaming scenarios where you just want to make sure that when people are in the home office, they should work on a local location. But when they are in the office or they are working with HCL Nomad, that they then consistently use the online location rather than suddenly working with an offline location on a device that shouldn't use it or is not optimized for using it. Moving on to the next business case, HCL Nomad allows to set a number of so-called application restrictions. For example, you can limit the maximum file size of attachments that are being added to documents, respectively to emails. And the default of that is 10 megabytes on HCL Nomad. And you may have, managers, for example, or staff that actually have to attach larger files, maybe 20 or 50 megabytes, depending on use case. And in that sense, it is very easy with Marvel Client to simply set the respective application restriction, like maximum attachment size for sending or for attaching in that sense through the configuration database. So it's a very easy action where we just made sure that across all the options, you can just point and click and say, this is what I want to happen on a respective client, in this case, HCL Nomad. Again, moving on, Another business case on HCR Nomad specifically would be to manage the so-called recent applications. So when you launch the HCR Nomad client, you get something similar to the Notes desktop or workspace that you know from rich clients, where on HCR Nomad you have kind of a welcome page that shows the most recently used applications. And every time you open a database, it moves to the top left of that recent app screen. Now, you may want to make sure that when people start their Notes client, whether for the first time or subsequently, that list of applications is properly maintained so that it always has the user's mail file on it, for example, or your CRM context database, or any other important databases that you use in your environment. And again, there is an action that we added to the configuration database that allows you to very specifically manage which icons you want people to have on their respective recent apps page. You may also notice something in here that ensures that this is generic. So you can have one action that makes sure that every user has their mail file on the top left on the recent apps page. And you don't have to create one action per user because they have different mail files. So Marvel Client has a lot of magic in it where you can simply, with one single action, make sure that this action runs for 100, 1,000, or hundreds of thousands of end users seamlessly, just alike. And now we're moving over into business case number 10. So our kind of last free business case, but the fifth one on HCR Nomad that is free. You may want to also manage local replicas on HCR Nomad. For those of you who already use Marvel Client prior to HCR Nomad, we made the decision that when HCR Nomad came to market with Marvel Client included, that it would not manage local replicas like on a laptop. The simple reason being that if you as a customer already had 10 desktop icon actions, that would ensure that a user has a local replica of their mail file and local replicas of the CRM application suite, then you would essentially replicate, hundreds of megabytes to gigabytes onto that laptop, which is totally fine because a laptop typically has many, many gigabytes of free disk space. On HCR Nomad, if an end user has a tablet with 64 gigabytes, then they do not have limitless storage, so to say. And in that sense, we decided that by default, no local replicas are created on Nomad. But in the configuration database, it's again very easy to simply check a box and say, I want this local replica not only to be managed on a laptop, but also on HCR Nomad just as much. So with a single click, you can very easily make sure that certain databases are also properly replicated onto HCR Nomad. And yes, you can also use selective replication so that, for example, on HCR Nomad, you don't want your entire contact database, but only the last, the documents that have changed or been created in the last 100 days. So it's very easy to, make sure that this is in line with your disk space requirements and availability on HCR Nomad. So that's kind of covering the 5 business cases on HCR Nomad. And now I'm going to just quickly run through 3 business cases, that we have as an upsell, just so that you understand that there's more value to be had from Marvel Client, but admittedly, there's a setting for not for free. So the first one here is, you may want the same functionality on rich clients as I've showed you earlier on HCR Nomad. Now that doesn't apply to recent apps because they don't exist on rich clients, but as the simplest example, you want to manage locations or connections or desktop icons or bookmarks or local replicas, replicator pages, and there are many things that you can do with Marvel Client Basic on rich clients just as much. And in the easiest sense, I just wanted to cover this, that if you enjoy the functionality of Marvel Client on HCR Nomad for free, then you can get the exact same functionality on your rich client just as much if you want to go beyond what is offered with Essentials. Next one here is, you may want fast and comprehensive roaming, either via network drives or HTTP. So yes, Notes and Domino kind of offer Notes client roaming from out of the box. The big difference here is that a typical roaming set from out of the box has some 50 megabytes. In many customer environments, we see something like 200 megabytes on average that nodes and Domino roaming consume by roaming your configuration across your Domino servers. Now with Marvel Client, we can roam an entire client configuration with as little as 2 megabytes. So it essentially means that when people close the Nodes client, we write out the desktop of the user and the bookmarks not in their native format, but in XML format, which is much smaller. And we add Eclipse settings and Nodes INI settings and a lot more in a very streamlined and optimized fashion. And that then means that when a user starts the Nodes client, we then check whether this client wrote the last backup. If it did, then there's nothing to roam. If the user is switching machines or changed the backup set on a different machine, then we roam the before mentioned 2 megabytes onto that machine so that it has that configuration consistently across all clients. So first of all, we are bringing down the backup sets from 50 plus megabytes to 2 megabytes. So we save you like 98% disk space for all your Nodes client configuration backups. Furthermore, we save you around 95% network traffic compared to running a Nodes client off a network drive. In the past, there were often companies who would run their Nodes client off of a network drive to make sure that they would not have to roam. So a user would mount a network drive and then just use the data directory on that network drive. That comes with heavy traffic, and it comes with the Nodes client being reliant on an upright connection to that network drive, meaning that if the Nodes client loses connection to the network drive, that it essentially either crashes or freezes and then crashes. And in that sense, we make a Nodes client entirely independent of network drives. From a technical perspective, this also comes with an additional benefit where a Nodes client maintains at least 8 different file handles towards the file infrastructure if you run a Nodes client off of network drives, because it constantly has a file handle to names NSF and desktop NDK and bookmark NSF and log NSF, and that it has to constantly have open. That also explains that if the connection to the network drive goes slow or breaks down, that file handle is broken, and that's why the client then crashes, because it relies on those files to be constantly open. Now, when you use Marvel Client roaming, it means that when a user starts Nodes, we fetch 2 megabytes from the network drive. After that, the client is entirely network independent for the remainder of the Nodes client session, until when the user shuts down, we then back up the 2 megabytes again. So if you have 1,000 users in your environment, then you save 8,000 file handles towards your file servers, which your Windows file servers or your other file servers will be happy about just as much. So roaming is a big use case across our customers, especially also in Citrix. So where in Citrix or Windows Terminal Server or virtual desktop infrastructure, you would typically head down the route of running a Nodes client off of a network drive. You simply convert this into a Marvel Client roaming installation so that when a user logs on to the Citrix receiver or launches the Nodes client on Citrix or Windows Terminal Server, we then just copy 2 megabytes onto the Citrix server into the app data local directory or the Windows temp folder, and then we run that data directory for the remainder of the session in that local directory. When the user then closes the client or logs off from Citrix or Windows Terminal Server, you can simply delete the entire data directory. So you do not persistently need growing data directories that blow up over time with Marvel Client roaming, but in essence, you have very small backups, very fast roaming times, and the best experience in virtual desktop infrastructure in general, together with Marvel Client roaming. And as a side note, we're happy to help you with this, especially our host, Vlad, is happy to help you, or Sai1 is happy to help you as a company also with this, in making sure that you enjoy the benefits of Marvel Client, whether that's roaming or enjoying the benefits of Marvel Client Basic as on HCL Nomad on your other clients. You know, that's stuff where we can, instead of just talking you to death, we would happily help you eval this and prove its worth in your particular environment. Next one and last one, kind of on the use of business cases, is business case number 13. Again, one is that isn't free as such. There was a free option of Marvel Client Upgrade that allowed customers to upgrade to 10.01 or 10.01 Fixpack 1 or a 10.01 Fixpack 2. We stopped after that because we also have to make a living. But in essence, it's proven its worth on, at the moment, close to 2 million clients upgraded. So I'd have to correct the slide actually from a couple of weeks ago. We were at 1 million clients upgraded. We're now moving steadily towards 2 million clients upgraded with Marvel Client Upgrade across many customers in many different countries in the world. What Marvel Client Upgrade allows you to do is, without corporate software deployment knowledge, is simply create an upgrade path for all your Nodes clients to easily upgrade them to the latest and greatest from HCL. So if you want to make sure that all your users have 11.01 installed and you're coming from Nodes 8.5 or even Node 7, or even sometimes we still see customers on Node 6, and we help them upgrade from whatever they have today in a single step onto HCL 11.01 Fixpack, latest and greatest. And that is very easy because you just open up a form in the configuration database, you select the installer components that HCL provides to you, and all the rest of the magic from Marvel Client is done automatically. As a very simple example, you may have data directories that are still installed in C Lotus Nodes data or in App Data Local IBM Nodes data, and those are automatically migrated to HCL Nodes data directories. Now, you may wonder, why is that necessary? You could just keep them in the Lotus or in the IBM paths. A client is much more stable and much more predictable, and also easier to support if it has the standard directories according to the latest and greatest from HCL. So we convert your existing Nodes client installations into the latest and greatest automatically by just checking a couple of boxes inside of a very easy configuration wizard. And we take care of all the different pains that come with typical software deployment. So we understand how to tackle user account control in Windows. We understand how to perform the elevation in a secure and reliable fashion. We also provide you with a Marvel Client Upgrade service if wanted. You could not use the service and just use elevation through an encrypted password file. You could also use it together with your corporate software deployment. So you could create a package with Marvel Client Upgrade that you then give to your corporate software deployment colleagues that they use to upgrade your Nodes clients. Why is that beneficial? Because corporate software deployment is typically not Nodes client aware. It has no idea of what the Nodes names and address book is. It typically cannot convert the data directory from one location to another. It typically also is not aware of what it needs to be done to Nodes INI to make the new client work best. And your software deployment people typically know best how to bring out this package. Marvel Client Upgrade knows best how to upgrade your Nodes client. So you can simply create a shrink wrap package that you either have Marvel Client bring out, which could also be Marvel Client Essentials, or you give it to your software deployment colleagues and have them bring it out in the easiest way, shape, and form. And again, someone would be happy to help you in experiencing this and seeing this work in your particular infrastructure. There's much more to be said on Marvel Client Upgrade. We can also help you upgrade Citrix servers with this, and there's a lot of automation and smartness going into this, but the point of this is not having a advertisement session for Marvel Client Upgrade. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of the use cases that Marvel Client can help you bring down your help desk ticket through what we offer for free. So I showed you 5 business cases on your rich client infrastructure side that you could simply use. And then I showed you 5 business cases for HCL Nomad, so the mobile clients from HCL. And these are just 3 possible additions on top of it to ensure that your Nodes client infrastructure is easily managed and you don't have any issues or troubles. If you'd like to know more, then we'd love to welcome you to the Panagenda booth cafe kind of virtually, which is open 60 minutes in the next 60 minutes after this particular session. So I'm just leaving this URL out here. So you might want to just hop in for a couple of questions. Naturally, I'm going to transition over into Q&A right now, but if you're shy or you have longer questions or you want to see something in more detail, then we'd be happy to have you join us in the cafe over on the URL that you can see down here on the screen. With that being said, I'm almost onto the spot kind of with 45 minutes, and we're moving over into questions and answers. And once again, thank you very much for your time, and a special thank you to the translator who hopefully was able to kind of cope with my fast speaking halfway. If you do not, then it's all my fault. The translator is awesome, and I apologize for speaking too fast and using too many terms that may have been difficult to translate.
Florian, thank you very much for fantastic session about panagenda Marvel client. I think I'm pretty sure that there is no person in Russia or in a Russian Notes user group who does not know about your products. But we still have some questions. I think you mentioned that a lot of people are working remotely, right, from homes. That's reality for now. And a lot of customers are concerned, or especially security people are concerned if the employee can copy database to, somewhere locally, because this computer is home PC. And is there any solution that Marvel client can mitigate this?
There's a fantastic solution, which I may say is also existing partially of you, because you had the idea, if I may say so. And it's a combination of two things. So I mentioned earlier in the beginning that we have a module that is called Marvel Client Restrict, which allows you to say that end users are not allowed to create local databases, for example. And that would be in general. So you do not have to set the respective settings in the database access control list, which would also prevent them from copying or printing documents. But you may just want to have a solution where people cannot locally replicate it. Now, as awesome as that is, where Marvel Client can prevent creating those local databases, the big issue is that if a user is smart enough to then remove Marvel Client from Notes RNI, that they can still kind of create any local databases according to security. What we brought to life there is, we called it, together with you, we called it Marvel Client Alcatraz, is a solution that ensures that a Notes client cannot be launched without Marvel Client. In a nutshell, what this does is, on your Domino servers, you tell, in a policy, you can say that clients may not connect if they are older than, for example, Notes release 25. And then Marvel Client tells the Domino server that they're working with Notes release 25, which doesn't exist. You can pick any particular number that you would want to pick. And that ensures that without Marvel Client and without bringing the security in place, they cannot launch Notes in any way, shape, or form. So you do not have any risk of data loss or data breach with that particular solution.
That's awesome. So it means that the user is experiencing the same ease of use of Notes, while there is no drawbacks in security.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very good to know. I have another question. So you mentioned that it's possible to put a mail file in particular position, like XY, right, on some coordinates. Is it possible, because a lot of our customers are using many systems, and depending on your role in your organization, you may want to have a separate tab on a workspace with particular set of icons. And I think because I saw a customer who is configuring a brand new Notes client for a new employee, and it took him like 20 minutes, maybe more, because a lot of icons, because he had even prepared a draft letter with all the icons. You need to click, put it in the right direction, but sometimes people just move them back and forth. They cannot find. So it's possible to do a role-based workspace provisioning?
Yes, that is very easy. So first of all, in this presentation, I only covered the tip of the iceberg. Marvel Client has over 200 different actions to manage things on a nodes client. And one of the things you just mentioned that I didn't talk about here is you can add workspace tabs, you can remove workspace tabs, you can color workspace tabs, you can rename workspace tabs, you can even move workspace tabs, which you can't even do in the nodes client itself. So you cannot drag and drop a tab from somewhere to somewhere. You can also make sure that on the first tab, people have your corporate icons, and any other icons are automatically moved to the second or third tab. And then you could also make sure that if a user is part of a particular group or has a certain certifier, that they then get certain tabs or sets of icons on their workspace. Similarly for bookmarks. So you can just make sure that when a user starts nodes, they always have what you want them to have, and it depends on their group memberships and who they are in the organization. Let me add just one more thing here as well, which blends in with Marvel Client Upgrade as well as client management, which is we can make sure that when a user launches the nodes client for the very first time, it is automatically configured with everything needed. So all they have to do is enter their password. The moment they have entered their password, the location documents are pre-configured, the desktop icons, the local replicas, the local replicator page, and everything of that is streamlined the way that a customer wants it. You can even go one step kind of before that, making sure that you can deploy an image onto your laptops, which is static, which never changes in the next 5 years. And when it's launched by either the end user or help the staff in pre-provisioning the machine, it would fetch the latest and greatest from a central repository like 11, Notes 11 or Notes 12. It would pull it down onto that local machine. It would pre-provision the entire Notes installation according to configuration. And when then that Nodes client is launched, the user only has to enter his password or her password, and then it fetches new instructions from the config database to add whatever tabs you've added in the configuration database. So the whole life cycle from you didn't have a laptop at all before or getting a new one to whenever you start your Nodes client, we can cover with Marvel Client.
That's that's why I asked it. I want that all our audience know about that. And I think the ability of Marvel Client essentials to cover also Nomad brings this ability to control remotely all the bring your own devices. One of the features is, for example, a cool biometric device like Face ID on iOS. You can enable this remotely with Marvel Client. So you don't need to write instructions for users. You just turn on some nodes, INI parameters, and it's just awesome. So yeah, I have, I think, one more final question about locations. I think it's a classical problem that user clicks on an offline location, and it's really important to work together between, let's say, analyzing what you have in Marvel Client Analyze, understanding all your misconfigurations, maybe what you can do, and just doing repetitive new actions, how to fix infrastructure, like removing unneeded locations, unneeded nodes INI parameters, and a lot of stuff, so your infrastructure works in the best shape.
Yeah. So with Marvel Client, as I showed earlier, is you can always make sure that if a user accidentally closes a client offline, that we change it to online again on the next client startup. We could also do that based on conditions. So only change them to online if they are inside of the corporate network, for example, or if they are connected to VPN. So you can make that condition based, that users do not have to understand themselves, am I now on VPN, am I in the office, am I not in the office? But depending on where they are, especially with COVID and Corona, you can simply make sure that if they are in their home office, we switch them to, I would better call it travel, working with a local replica, so to say. And another important note here is that even if a client is offline, we will connect to the Domino server on the next client startup to check for any changes. So let's assume you didn't create an action to switch people over to online, you forgot so, then that would be an issue if we wouldn't connect to the Domino server on next line setup because the user is offline. Independent of the user being on an offline location, we connect to the config database and check for new actions. So you can also introduce actions fixing things after the fact. Yeah. So it's always,
yes. So it's no like you saved an action and you say, oh, what I'm done, I have to run again across all the computers. So
right.
We are not surprised you thought even about that.
Thank you. Been around for some time.
Yeah, and we can remind our, I think, our participants that we have awesome documentation of your products made in Russian, including Marvel Client upgrade, which is a hot topic because everybody upgrades to Domino 10 to 11. Soon we will get upgrade for V12. And Florian, thank you. You are the master of Marvel Client. Thank you very much for coming and presenting your great session.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm only the face to the master of being all this. There's a ton of very smart people kind of behind me. Well, not right behind me right now, but you get the point, who make this all possible, including yourself. So thank you very much for having us today and for the spectacular organization. This event is pretty much the best virtual event that I've ever attended, I have to say. And I do hope that we get to the point again at some point where we can also have it physically, but for the time being, I'm very much enjoying this, and we are very, very impressed by how you are organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. See you next year in St. Petersburg.
Very much hope so.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.